welcome to another episode of Teddy Ruxpin's Book Club. And this is Casey Whitener. This is my book, After December. And in the back of the book is the book club guide. And so all of these videos are going to answer the questions in the book club guide, at least from my perspective. I mean, the idea is that they should spur conversation with you and your other book club members after you've read the book. So the first question is about Brian Listow, who's our first person narrator. And I've been thinking a lot about Brian lately because I'm writing the follow-up to After December, which is called Before Pittsburgh. And everybody kept asking me what happens between the last two chapters of After December, this transformation that we see from Brian. And in an earlier video, I talk about how it's only 6 days. The beginning of this book, the majority of this book takes place just in the worst time of his life, right? So then there's this big gap, right? There's 3 years in between these last two chapters. And so people wanted to know what had transpired, what had happened, other than, of course, Brian growing up, right? So now here I am writing Brian again, several years after I finished After December and trying to get back into the character. But really, it's not that hard because he's in me. I mean, big time. This is almost borderline alter ego guy. But it's been really fun with Before Pittsburgh because this is not a true story in any way. And so trying to find the small moments in his life over that period of time that have changed Brian have been really interesting to me. So first person narrator is Brian, stays Brian, remains Brian. We're in his head. And some of the limitations of a first person narrator are that your reader could get sick of the first person narrator. They might be tired of being in Brian's head for an entire book. In fact, some of the earliest drafts that I turned in, people didn't like Brian. And so they didn't want to hang in there for an entire book. Some of you even did hang in there for the entire book and still don't like Brian, although he has some redemption there at the end. And so maybe after or before Pittsburgh will give you a view a little bit to what occurred. The first person narrator is also a very limited viewpoint in that we only see the things that Brian sees, and we only experience things through the lens of how does this affect Brian, because of course he's a pretty selfish guy. He's 22 years old and he's an only child, and he's never really had to work for pretty much anything up until this point in his life. So as we see him overcoming adversity and having to kind of take his hits on the chin in the 3 years before Pittsburgh, we start to see Brian trying to decide what kind of person he really wants to be. And that's been a lot of fun because I don't think we very often get to watch a character intentionally evolve and intentionally question himself about, is this really who I am and does this represent me? So the first person narrator, Brian, I didn't have a choice. That's his story, and he has always been here saying, hey, write my story. And the limitations to it, I didn't feel them as I was writing it. And I don't feel them now with Before Pittsburgh. I feel very comfortable in Brian's skin, and I do feel that the perspective he's giving us is a sufficient perspective to tell these particular stories. But I could see where it can get a little exhausting and kind of wear people out. I tend to love him, and so I'm okay with it. And hopefully our readers will be as well. So what do you think? Is the first person narrator too close? Is Brian Listow an exhausting first person narrator? Can you trust him? Can you trust what he sees and what he says? And can you trust his judgments of the people around him? I think in this book we can see that Brian does not have very clear judgment when it comes to the people around him. So some of that to continue to talk about in your book clubs. Thanks for bringing After December to your book club. I appreciate you. You can sign up for periodic emails. They're not spammy. I won't send them to you all the time, I promise. But it'll just give you an idea of when Before Pittsburgh is going to be coming out, and also when I'll be at some events, maybe in your neighborhood. So go to the comments section of this video, and you can see the subscription link for Teddy Ruxpin's Book Club. I'm Casey Whitener. Thanks again for reading After December, and I'll see you next time on Teddy Ruxpin's Book Club.